Summer, 1941. The skies over Europe burned with exhaust and ambition. The Battle of Britain was over. The Spitfire reigned supreme. For the first time, the Luftwaffe had been pushed back. Its pride wounded. Its aces humbled. The age of German air superiority had ended, or so the Allies believed. Calm before the storm. For months, the Royal Air Force ruled the daylight. Spitfires and Hurricanes patrolled the Channel like guardians of a conquered sky. Pilots once hunted by Messerschmitts now chased them instead. Confidence soared in the West, perhaps too high. But deep inside Germany, behind the blast doors of secret hangars and engineering halls, something new was taking shape. Not just another fighter, a weapon born from frustration and designed from the ground up to change the rules. The Luftwaffe had lost the initiative. To win it back, they needed a revolution. And revolutions do not come from committees, they come from genius. The visionary. His name was Kurt Tank. Not a pilot, not a soldier, but an engineer, cold, precise, unyielding. He believed that the future of air combat would not be defined by light, delicate aircraft like the Spitfire, but by power, by machines that could dive, strike, and survive anything thrown their way. While others sought elegance, Tank sought dominance. His designs were brutal, beautiful in their defiance. Where others built fighters that danced, he wanted one that roared. The birth of the Focke-Wulf Fw. In 1938, Tank's team began crafting what the Luftwaffe had never asked for, a second frontline fighter. At the time, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 was already the pride of Germany's skies. To propose another seemed almost heretical. But Tank saw what others didn't, that the 109 had limits. It was fast but fragile, elegant but narrow. Its inline engine made it vulnerable, its cockpit cramped, its design aging faster than the war itself. So he chose a different path, a path of power and survivability. A radial engine, air-cooled, rugged, simple. Thick armor plating, wide landing gear. A cockpit built for the man, not the machine. He called it the Fw-190 Verger, the Butcher Bird, a name that would soon send a shiver through Allied radio chatter. The first flight. The prototype lifted off on June 1, 1939. It was loud, angry, and imperfect. Overheating, vibrating, shaking like a beast not yet tamed. But even through its flaws, one truth was clear. This aircraft had potential. Its engine, a BMW 801, an 18-cylinder twin-row radial, sounded less like a purr and more like a growl. It didn't whisper through the air, it devoured it. When test pilots returned to the ground, they had one thing to say. It feels alive. The monster in the mist. By 1941, the Fw-190 was ready for war. But no one, not even the Luftwaffe, expected what came next. On August 19, 1941, RAF radar picked up an unfamiliar blip crossing the Channel. A single aircraft, unidentified, fast, low. The pilot of a Spitfire M5 gave chase. He saw a blur of metal and smoke ahead, and before he could fire, the unknown fighter was gone, climbing vertically, faster than anything he had ever seen. Moments later, his own aircraft was shredded by 20mm cannon fire. The hunter had become prey. The message from that encounter spread through the RAF like wildfire. We've met something new, and it's better than us. Shock and confusion. Reports poured in from every squadron. A new German fighter, faster at low altitude, deadlier in a dive, outturning even the best Spitfires in certain conditions. It could climb like a rocket, roar like a storm, and hit like a hammer. British pilots began to fear low-altitude engagements. The name Butcher Bird became whispered in briefing rooms and airfields. The Luftwaffe, once on the defensive, had unleashed a predator the Allies weren't prepared for. And the results were devastating. A new kind of power. The FW-190 didn't just outfly its opponents, it outlasted them. Its radial engine could take hits that would destroy a Spitfire. Its cockpit offered better visibility, its armor saved lives, and its heavy cannons ripped through bombers like paper. For the first time since 1940, Luftwaffe pilots felt invincible again. They called it the fighter of fighters, a machine that turned even average pilots into hunters. When the first full squadron took to the skies, Jagdgeschwader 26, the famed Abbeville boys, the results were immediate. Within weeks, the RAF lost dozens of planes. Entire formations vanished in minutes. The balance of power in the skies shifted once more, in Germany's favor. A silent revolution. What made the FW-190 so terrifying wasn't just its speed or firepower. It was the philosophy behind it. Every screw, every panel, every control was built for efficiency under fire. The 190 could take off from rough fields. It could be maintained quickly by ground crews. Its wide gear prevented deadly crashes on landing. And its modular structure meant upgrades could be applied mid-war, without a full redesign. It was not just an aircraft. It was a system of survival. The Hunters return. By late 1941, the British skies were no longer safe. Allied pilots began to whisper the same words in fear and admiration. It's the new one, the radial, the 190. Spitfire squadrons started losing battles they should have won. Dogfights that once favored the Allies now ended in flames. The Butcher Bird dominated the low and mid-altitudes, cutting through clouds like a blade through silk. For the first time, the RAF realized it. They had met their match. And behind the cockpit of those German fighters, aces grinned with the knowledge that the hunter had returned. The legend awakens. In the hangars of occupied France, pilots wiped soot from their engines and grinned at their new machines. They could feel it. The tide had shifted again. The Bf-109 was no longer the only star in the Luftwaffe sky. The FW-190 had arrived, and with it, a new era of aerial warfare. One driven not by grace, but dominance. The sky had a new king, and its wings burned with fire.
Power is nothing without control. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was more than an aircraft. It was a declaration that German engineering could rewrite the laws of flight itself. Forged in frustration. Inside the Focke-Wulf facility at Bremen, the sound of hammers, engines, and ambition echoed day and night. Kurt Tank was no ordinary engineer. He was a perfectionist, obsessed with balance. To him, an airplane was a living thing. It needed lungs that could breathe, an engine that roared with purpose. It needed bones strong enough to endure punishment, and a heart steady enough to bring its pilot home. The Luftwaffe's demands were clear. They wanted a fighter faster than a Spitfire, tougher than a Thunderbolt, and easier to maintain than the Messerschmitt. Impossible, they said. Tank smiled. Then let's make the impossible fly. The power within. At the heart of the FW-190 was the BMW 801, a monstrous radial engine pushing out nearly 1,700 horsepower. To the untrained eye, it was just a bulk of cylinders and steel. To Kurt Tank, it was the soul of his creation. He saw beauty in brute force. Most engineers chased aerodynamics, smooth lines, gentle curves. Tank embraced the brutality of his design. The radial engine wasn't elegant, but it could take damage, overheat, and keep running. It was the first major German fighter to use an air-cooled engine. No vulnerable radiators to pierce, no coolant to leak, just raw mechanical endurance. Pilots called it the engine that wouldn't die. But with power came chaos. The early FW-190 suffered from constant overheating. At high speeds, the cockpit turned into an oven, temperatures soaring above 50 degrees Celsius. Test pilots fainted mid-flight. Tank refused to surrender. He and his engineers worked around the clock, designing a revolutionary cooling fan system built directly into the propeller hub, a mechanical marvel that kept the massive engine breathing under pressure. It was engineering genius disguised as simplicity. The Butcherbird was becoming unstoppable. Designing for survival. Most fighters of the era were built like arrows, thin, narrow, optimized for speed but fragile as glass. Tank had a different philosophy. A dead pilot wins no war. The FW-190 was built for survival. Its cockpit was wrapped in armor plating. Its canopy provided nearly full visibility, giving pilots an edge in every dogfight. The fuselage, thick and sturdy, could take bullet holes and still bring a pilot home. Its landing gear was wider, safer, stable even on muddy fields. Every screw, every panel, every weld had purpose. The aircraft didn't just fly, it endured. For the ground crews, it was a gift. Panels could be removed with speed, engines swapped within hours, no delicate maintenance rituals, just practicality. The FW-190 wasn't just made to fight, it was made to stay in the fight. Firepower from the future. When it came to weapons, the FW-190 was nothing short of revolutionary. While other nations armed their fighters with rifle-caliber machine guns, Tank's creation was designed to obliterate. The standard version, the FW-190A3, carried 4 20mm MG-115 cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. In total, it could unleash over 700 rounds per minute of armor-piercing and explosive ammunition. The firepower was devastating. A single burst could rip the wings off a bomber. One well-placed volley could erase a Spitfire from the sky in seconds. Pilots didn't dogfight anymore. They executed. The Butcherbird wasn't graceful. It was final. The shape of a predator. Every part of the FW-190's body was crafted for one purpose: to dominate the sky. Its wings were shorter, thicker, more rigid. That gave it unmatched roll rate. It could flip, dodge, and counter in the blink of an eye. While the Spitfire turned with elegance, the 190 rolled with violence. Its controls were perfectly harmonized, responsive, immediate. Pilots described it as an extension of their body. Every movement translated directly to aggression. In a dive, it didn't fall. It descended like judgment. The evolution begins. Tank's genius didn't stop with one design. He built the FW-190 to evolve. It wasn't just a plane. It was a platform. He foresaw a future where this machine could transform, from fighter to interceptor, from bomber to ground attacker. And it did. The 190 spawned a family of variants. The A-series, the main fighter. The F-series, built for ground assault. The G-series, a long-range hunter. Later, as the war darkened, Tank pushed the limits even further, designing the FW-190D9, a streamlined, high-altitude version powered by the Jumo 113 engine. They called it the Dora. It was faster, sleeker, deadlier, a final evolution of the Predator. The 190 was no longer just a fighter. It was the foundation of an entire generation of German aircraft. Respect from the enemy. Even the Allies, hardened by combat, couldn't help but admire it. When a captured FW-190 was tested by the Royal Air Force in 1942, pilots returned stunned. They wrote, "In almost every respect superior to the Spitfire Mark V." For a brief, haunting moment, Britain realized it was behind. behind in speed, behind in firepower, behind in innovation. The Luftwaffe had boots something they could barely understand and could not easily defeat. The beast tamed. By 1942, the Fw-190 dominated Europe's skies. From the French coast to the Russian front, it hunted without mercy. Its pilots, men like Walter Nowotny, Otto Kittel, and Josef Priller, became legends, scoring dozens of kills each in a single machine. But even Tank knew no beast remains untamed. The Allies were learning, adapting, evolving. And while the 190 reigned supreme, a new storm was already forming across the Channel. The engineers at Supermarine were not sleeping. They were building something to strike back. Something designed for one purpose: to hunt the butcher bird. The age of dominance never lasts, and the Fw-190's golden sky was about to darken.
In war, every weapon finds its rival. Every legend meets its test. And for the Focke-Wulf Fw-190, that test came screaming through the clouds of 1942, a machine forged in British steel, driven by desperation and pride. The Spitfire Mark IX. The sky strikes back. Summer 1942. The Luftwaffe owned the daylight over Western Europe. Fw-190s tore across the Channel like ghosts, hitting convoys, bombers, and airfields, then vanishing before the RAF could respond. For British pilots, it was humiliation. Their beloved Spitfires, once the undisputed kings of the Battle of Britain, were suddenly outclassed, outgunned, outclimbed. Every encounter ended the same: a flash of wings, a burst of cannon fire, and another Spitfire spiraling down into the Channel. The RAF called it the Crisis of 42. The Germans called it balance restored. But behind the despair, British engineers were quietly working in the shadows of Castle Bromwich to design something faster, stronger, sharper. Their goal wasn't just to match the Fw-190, it was to destroy it. Birth of a counter. The answer came from a machine already in production. The Spitfire Mark V, reforged into something entirely new. They called it the Spitfire Mark IX, powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, a twin-stage supercharged engine capable of soaring higher and faster than anything before. It wasn't just a new aircraft. It was Britain's reply, a symbol of defiance with wings. When the first Mark IX took off, it climbed like a rocket. Its acceleration was unmatched. Its control was silk. It was everything the Fw-190 feared, and for the first time in a year, the balance of the skies began to shift. First encounter. August 1942. The Dieppe raid. The Royal Air Force launched a massive air operation to cover the Allied assault on the French coast. Over the beaches, hundreds of aircraft clashed, a thunderstorm of propellers, smoke, and gunfire. In the chaos, the Spitfire Mark IX met the Fw-190 for the first time. It was no longer a slaughter. It was a duel. At high altitudes, the Spitfire climbed faster. In dives, the Fw-190 held its nerve. The British pilots reported something they hadn't felt in months: hope. Now the hunters had become equals. The war in the air was entering its deadliest chapter. Duel of the Aces. From 1942 to 1943, the skies over France and the Channel became a deadly chessboard. Aces on both sides rose and fell in days. German legends like Josef Priller, Walter Novotny, and Hermann Graf hunted in small groups, their Fw-190s slashing through formation after formation. They relied on brute force and precision, striking hard, then disappearing fast. Across the Channel, British aces like Johnny Johnson and Alan Deere adapted. They learned to turn tighter, to climb differently, to strike at the 190's blind spots. Each duel became personal, a silent contest between two philosophies of flight. The Fw-190 was aggression incarnate, heavy, stable, brutal in its firepower. The Spitfire was elegance weaponized, light, nimble, and surgical. They were opposites and equals. Two predators circling the same sky, each a reflection of its creator's soul. The fear in the clouds. For German pilots, the early confidence began to waver. Where once the 90 ruled the air without question, now every mission carried uncertainty. The Spitfire Mark 9 could climb to intercept them before they even reached the coast. Dogfights that once ended quickly now dragged into spiraling duels. Altitude, patience, and instinct determining who would live another day. Luftwaffe commanders issued new tactics. Avoid prolonged combat. Strike fast, then break away. The 90 was still deadly, but its era of effortless domination was fading. Even Kurt Tank knew it. The machine that once symbolized air superiority was now facing something it could not easily overpower. A rival built from equal genius. The Eastern Storm. While the Western Front turned into a contest of technology, the Eastern Front became a crucible of endurance. In the vast frozen skies over Stalingrad and Kursk, Fw-190s faced not elegant Spitfires, but the relentless waves of Soviet Yaks and La-5s. Here, the 90's armor and firepower made it a monster. Soviet pilots called it the Gray Devil. Its cannons shredded entire bomber formations. Its radial engine shrugged off hits that would kill any other fighter. In the East, the Fw-190 regained its crown, the ultimate predator of the endless steppe. But as winter deepened and fuel shortages grew, even the finest machine could not defy logistics. The Luftwaffe's strength thinned, and the butcherbird's wings began to feel heavy. The moment of balance. By 1943, a strange equilibrium settled over Europe. Neither side could claim total dominance. Every sky was contested, every sortie a gamble. The Fw-190 and the Spitfire Mark 9 were now locked in an eternal stalemate, each learning from the other, each evolving in response. British engineers refined the Spitfire's wings and engine. German mechanics lightened the 190's frame and improved its roll rate. Both machines were reaching the peak of piston engine design. The air war had become not just a battle of nations, but a conversation between engineers. One spoke in precision, the other in power. And together, they defined what the limits of human flight could be. An uneasy respect. Among pilots, something rare emerged. Respect. Enemies who never met, who fought and killed without names, found admiration in each other's machines. Captured FW-190s were studied by the Allies, and British pilots marveled at their craftsmanship. Likewise, German engineers analyzed wrecked Spitfires with quiet awe. The men on both sides understood something their leaders often didn't: that the enemy was not ignorant, not evil, but a reflection of their own pursuit of excellence. And as the battles raged, each side unknowingly pushed the other closer to perfection. "We fought each other," one British pilot later said, "but what we really fought was gravity itself." The duel of titans was far from over, but even as these machines defined the golden age of air combat, a darker truth loomed on the horizon, one that neither side could not ignore. A new wave of machines was coming, faster, higher, fueled not by gasoline, but by fire itself.
Every empire that rises must one day fall. Every predator, however fierce, eventually bleeds. By 1944, the skies that once belonged to the Luftwaffe had become a graveyard. The hunters of yesterday were now the hunted, and the Focke-Wulf Fw-190, the pride of German engineering, was fighting not for victory, but for survival. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Fuel shipments arrived later. Ammunition was rationed. Maintenance crews vanished to the Eastern Front. What was once a machine of domination was now crippled by scarcity. The Luftwaffe, once the spear of blitzkrieg, was bleeding from 1,000 unseen wounds. Factories that once built hundreds of aircraft a month now struggled to build dozens. Skilled laborers were drafted into infantry units. Synthetic fuel plants were bombed relentlessly by Allied raids. Every sortie now came at a cost, every victory a miracle. The Luftwaffe's proudest wings began to fracture under the weight of a war they could no longer sustain. And yet, in this slow collapse, the Fw-190 refused to die. Kurt Tank watched as his creation, the Butcher Bird, was twisted by necessity. No longer a pure air superiority fighter, it was forced into roles it was never designed for. The Fw-190F and Fw-190G variants emerged, heavy, burdened with bombs, rockets, and armor plating. The elegant Predator had become a bruiser, a low-flying assault beast screaming over battlefields and torching columns of tanks and trucks. It lost its altitude advantage, it lost its grace, but it gained something else: endurance. These new variants struck deep behind enemy lines, blasting Soviet armor at Kursk, cutting Allied supply chains in Normandy, and defying death in the face of overwhelming odds. Tank himself described these models as the price of survival. The Eastern Front, vast, cold, merciless, a battlefield where machines froze before men did. Here, the Fw-190 found a new purpose. Against the endless waves of Soviet armor and bombers, it became a weapon of terror and precision. Fw-190 F-8 ground attack squadrons roared across the steppes at treetop level, their 20mm cannons ripping through tanks and trains with surgical cruelty. Armed with 250 kilograms and 500 kilograms bombs, they dove at impossible angles, pilots blacking out under the G-force, to hit columns crawling across the frozen plains. Soviet troops called it the Black Hawk. Its growling radial engine announced death seconds before impact. But for every mission flown, another crew didn't return. Anti-aircraft fire was merciless. Russian skies were a graveyard of ambition. The 190 had become both predator and prey. On the Western Front, another storm was gathering. By mid-1943, the United States had entered the air war in full force. The 8th Air Force, with its fleets of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, brought the war to Germany's doorstep.
Day after day, massive bomber streams darkened the sky. Thousands of engines roared in unison, a thunder that never ended. For the FW-190 pilots, these were no longer duels between equals. They were battles of survival against an enemy that seemed infinite. German interceptors climbed through flak and chaos to meet them. Their guns spat fire, tearing through bombers at point-blank range. But with every B-17 that fell, 3 more appeared behind it. The air was thick with tracer rounds, exploding fuel and burning aluminum. It wasn't just combat, it was apocalypse with wings. Then came something even worse. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a tank with wings. The P-51 Mustang, long-range, graceful, deadly. The Luftwaffe's last advantage, its homeland airfields, was gone. Now, Allied fighters escorted bombers all the way to Berlin and back. No sanctuary, no rest. Every airfield, every hangar, every refueling stop was within range of American guns. The 190 pilots, once the hunters of the skies, now scrambled just to defend their own homes. Takeoffs under attack, landings under fire. Losses so frequent that new pilots didn't even learn their squadron names before being shot down. The Butcherbird was still deadly, but the world around it had changed. The sky no longer belonged to predators, it belonged to numbers. By 1944, the Luftwaffe had lost its veterans, the men who once ruled the skies. Novotny, Kittel, Galland were dead, grounded, or exhausted. In their place came boys, teenagers, barely trained, sent into machines they barely understood. They were called Kindersoldaten des Himmels, child soldiers of the sky. Their instructors taught them how to take off, how to shoot, how to die bravely. Many never even learned how to land. FW-190s, once piloted by legends, now carried trembling hands, shaking voices, and eyes that had seen too little life. The survival rate? Less than 10 sorties. The Butcherbird, once a machine of mastery, was now a coffin with wings. Even as the world around him crumbled, Kurt Tank refused to surrender to despair. He believed that engineering could still shift fate. In 1944, he unveiled his masterpiece, the FW-190D9, Dora. Sleek, streamlined, powered by the UMO 213A engine, a liquid-cooled monster that could push the aircraft beyond 700 kilometers per hour. The Dora was everything the old FW-190 dreamed of becoming. Faster climbs, higher ceilings, sharper control. It was an evolution born in ruin, the final blade of a dying empire. Luftwaffe ace Hans Dortmann called it the savior we never had time to use. Because by the time the Dora entered combat, it was already too late. Germany was burning. Its skies belonged to the Allies. The Dora soared, but had nowhere left to fly. The Luftwaffe's engineers, driven by desperation, began pushing science beyond reason. Tank was ordered to collaborate on new experimental aircraft, machines that would later define the future of aviation. The Ta-52, a high-altitude interceptor built from the FW-190's bones, was one such design. A monster with wings stretched thin, engine tuned to survive the edge of the atmosphere. It could fly at 13,000 meters, outrunning nearly every Allied fighter. But only a handful were ever built. Germany's factories were rubble, its fuel gone. The war had entered a phase where genius could no longer save it. Only time and fire ruled the sky. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was dying faster than it could be reborn. Allied raids destroyed production centers. Oil fields in Romania were gone. Even the elite JG-26 Schlageter squadron, once the pride of the FW-190, was reduced to a handful of exhausted pilots and broken planes. They flew because they had to, not because they believed they would win. Their missions were suicide, intercepting endless bomber formations, each time fewer returning than before. Ground crews stripped destroyed aircraft for parts, cannibalizing one to keep another alive. Paint peeled from their wings, armor cracked, but still the engines turned over. Still, the butcher bird refused to die. April 1945. The sky over Berlin burned red. The Soviet army had reached the city's gates. Above them, a handful of Fw-190s still flew, their markings faded, their fuel tanks nearly empty. They fought until the very end, against impossible odds, against Spitfires, Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and the endless Soviet tide. Their mission wasn't to win anymore. It was to delay the inevitable, to buy a few more hours, a few more breaths for a nation already lost. Eyewitnesses recall seeing Fw-190s dive vertically into tank columns, pilots choosing death over surrender. Others vanished into clouds, never seen again. In their final hours, the butcher birds of the Reich became what they had always been, symbols of defiance, flying on borrowed time. When the guns finally fell silent, the Fw-190's engine, the roaring BMW 801, sputtered its last. Factories were seized, designers were scattered. Kurt Tank himself fled Germany, his genius now a relic of a fallen world. But the aircraft he created refused to fade into oblivion. Captured Fw-190s were flown by the Allies, studied, tested, admired. The Soviets reverse-engineered their systems. The French even built them post-war under the name NC-900, a strange resurrection of the butcherbird under a different flag. The world had changed, but the echoes of that engine, that throaty, defiant growl, would be heard for decades. The story of the Fw-190's downfall wasn't just about defeat. It was about transition from one era of flight to another.
The war had ended. The factories were silent. And the once proud eagles of the Luftwaffe lay broken across the ruined airfields of Europe. But among the twisted metal and shattered dreams, there remained a machine whose story would not die. A machine born of defiance, carved by genius, and baptized in fire. The Focke-Wulf Fw-190. It had been feared, hated, admired, and above all, respected. Even by those who fought against it. When Allied engineers first examined captured Fw-190s, they were stunned. They found craftsmanship of rare precision, solutions that seemed ahead of their time, and a design that spoke of something deeper than war. The placement of armor, the ingenious cooling system, the way the controls responded like an extension of the pilot's will. This was not just a fighter. It was the reflection of a philosophy that speed, strength, and simplicity could coexist. British test pilots, accustomed to the grace of the Spitfire, climbed into the Fw-190 and came out silent. They said the same thing again and again. It feels alive. After the fall of Germany, the world's aviation powers scavenged its technology. The Soviets studied its wing loading. The Americans dissected its radial engine configuration. And in France, in a small and almost forgotten hangar, something extraordinary happened. The captured blueprints of the Fw-190 inspired a rebirth. Under French control, the NC-900 took flight, a post-war reconstruction of the German fighter built from leftover parts and dreams of a new beginning. It flew not as a weapon, but as a tribute to engineering brilliance. In the East, the lessons of the 190 structure influenced designs like the Yak-9 and La-9, aircraft that carried echoes of its philosophy, ruggedness, agility, and survivability. And decades later, in the jet age, its DNA lingered, hidden, but present in the thinking of engineers who valued efficiency and raw power over fragile elegance.
Even the American A-10 Thunderbolt II, nicknamed Warthog, carried whispers of the 190's soul. A radio-powered beast, armored, unstoppable, built to take damage and keep fighting. A spiritual descendant, forged from the same principle, a pilot's plane. But the FW-190's true legacy was not just mechanical. It was human. It lived on in the stories of those who flew it, men who faced impossible odds and made peace with the skies. Many of them never saw themselves as heroes. They were engineers, pilots, dreamers, men trapped in a war larger than themselves. But their bond with their machines was something timeless. They called it Der Würger, the butcher bird, a name born of fear, but remembered with awe. Today, restored FW-190s still take to the skies, roaring once again over air shows, their engines echoing across fields that once burned with war. Crowds look up, and for a moment, time folds in on itself. You can almost feel it, the ghost of history brushing your skin. A machine from a darker age, flying not as a weapon, but as a warning. Its sound is not of power, but of memory. Each turn of the propeller whispers the same truth, that technology is only as noble as the hand that wields it. That beauty can exist even in destruction, and that even in the ruins of war, the spirit of creation endures. The Focke-Wulf Fw-190 was born to dominate, but in the end, it transcended the battlefield. It became a symbol, not of victory or defeat, but of what humanity can build when it dares to dream beyond limits. A machine of war that somehow became a monument to innovation, to courage, to the eternal dance between man and machine. And so, as its wings slice once more through the quiet sky, one truth remains unshakable: that legends do not die. They evolve. They endure. They fly.